Yeah, my Tantra journey began on a women's residential workshop back in 2012. The whole programme was a series of 5 workshops, and without question, it was life-changing. I learned to celebrate the parts of me that shame had demanded that I kept hidden. I made peace with my body. What had felt like a prison became home again. It was truly, truly liberating. It was an emotional roller coaster of pleasure, of pain, and the thrill of the unknown. And we were certainly an eclectic group of women. Together, we bravely exposed our vulnerabilities and our vulvas, and witnessing and supporting each other, we quickly bonded through this shared experience of fear and of great expectations that we held. And as we progressed through each workshop, it became evident just how powerful this work really is. We literally transformed in front of each other's eyes. Some of us were quite unrecognisable from the women that had walked in at the start. But it wasn't all orgasmic pleasure and divine connection. There was a lot of opening up of old wounds, dancing at the edges of tolerance, taking risks, and sometimes crossing that line into re-wounding. Leaps of faith are exactly that. There's actually no guarantee that you're not going to come crashing down on the other side. Now, having personally spent what's probably more than a healthy amount of time in psychotherapy, I decided to take on for myself this learning and enrolled in the Masters in Psychology. So I ditched therapists for tutors, and I made some personal discoveries that really at least equalled my learning from the Tantra journey. And during my studies, I embarked upon a research project which explored women's experiences of Tantra. And the first thing I explored was, what limits our pleasure? Now, I'm going to talk from a social psychology perspective first, and I apologise. I don't know why I'm apologising. No, I'm not going to apologise. It is what it is. I will stand here. So from a social psychology perspective, the answer is quite simple. What limits women's pleasure? The patriarchy. And I thought of Tantra as this space that was free of judgment, that as women we were free to be entirely ourselves. And in many ways, yes, it certainly sets the scene for sexual liberation, but it's not a cultural vacuum. Those workshop walls, they can't prevent these insidious messages that limit female sexuality from penetrating that room. And there's 2 main culprits. At one end of the spectrum is traditional discourse or messages that define women as passive sexual objects, devoid of their own intrinsic sexual desire, engaging in sex solely in response to a man's invitation, and at which point she's expected to become immediately receptive, enthusiastic, but of course just the right amount. He doesn't want to have sex. And then so begins the coital imperative. Now, the coital imperative dictates what real sex is. Now, listen up, everybody. Real sex is penis in vagina. If you're messing about with any other orifice, or God forbid there's no penis involved at all, then frankly, it's not real sex, apparently. And this coital imperative dictates the course of action over the following few minutes. And it goes like this. There's a quick spit and rub. Penis enters vagina. There's a bit of thrusting, and they move quickly towards the grand denouement, where he proclaims his climax and ejaculates. Now, if in the unlikely event that he gives her an orgasm during this process, she must express her gratitude vocally. And if he doesn't, never mind, because it's not about her anyway. She can just fake it and make sure his feelings aren't hurt and let him get back to watching Match of the Day. Now, of course, all of this must take place in a long-term, committed, monogamous relationship. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum lies a permissive discourse, representing women as sexually empowered, desiring and generally up for it, creating pressure on women to present themselves actually in a way that's heterosexually attractive, sexually experienced, and willing to give most things a go. And so what we've got is 2 conflicting and controlling discourses that coexist. One which shames women for not being sexual enough, and another which shames them for being too sexual. And what I found from my research is that Tantra actually exposes a lot of this. And through it, women begin to redefine sex, challenge these judgments that they carry within themselves. Now, of course, it's not that simple. Some of these messages are very deeply embedded in our minds, and they're normalised, so we don't even see them to question them. But every woman I interviewed shifted some limitations around it. And I'm sorry to say that such limitations are not limited to folks who identify as cisgendered and heterosexual. For me, it manifested as shame. My need to be accepted by the other women meant that I kept a lid on my sexuality. Yes, I was out, but I didn't need to make a show of it. I was a paragon of good lesbianism. I made sure that other women felt safe in my company, that my sexuality couldn't sully them in some way. And I feared that they would think I was getting off on the experience in a way that they weren't. Even when we were in paired exercises where the focus was on pleasure, I worried that I was having too much pleasure, that my body would give me away. I'd be shamed by my arousal, even all these women having a fantastic time around me. And as the giver of touch, I worried what they thought about being partnered with me. I heard one woman say, well, at least she knows what she's doing down there. And at which point I had performance anxiety to me. And so, the second question I pondered is, what have we got to gain from taking risks in sex? Why is it that we sometimes want to play with fire? And the answer from the research that came was around personal growth. It was transformation. Because sexuality, and orgasm in particular, can act as a portal into a different state of consciousness. It's a psychic state of overwhelm. It's where our mental edges soften. They become permeable so that we may allow in new experience and be transformed by it. But not all sexual experiences contain enough energy to break down these rigid structures in the mind that naturally resist anything new. Basically, you're not going to be reborn after a quick fuck, even if your clitoris does get some attention. And so, the thing that can provide enough energy to move a sexual experience from the mediocre into the transformational is transgression. Now, what counts as transgressive is entirely personal. For one person, that can mean having heteronormative sex with the lights on. For another, it could be anal play, or being reduced to begging for touch. The what, in this sense, it really doesn't matter. It simply needs to push the line. And when we're pushed into the too muchness of an experience, we then go into a state of overwhelm. And in this state of overwhelm, the ego is unbound. It loses its grip on itself and on us. It's why from birth, though, it's a risky place. And so it's why from birth we seek regulation through connection with others. Because overwhelm is very risky. It's a place with the potential for transformation, but it's also got potential for trauma. And for most people, getting naked in front of relative strangers, participating in sexually intimate acts in the group space is pretty transgressive. So when it comes to Tantra, the energy is already in the room. But it needs holding, it needs anchoring, and it needs regulating to an extent. If you don't regulate it, it explodes into a shitstorm of trauma for you and your therapist to probably spend a good couple of years mopping up. Regulate it too much, the fire goes out. We have a nice time maybe, but no tantric magic takes place. So to navigate this space, we need agreements and trust through connection. Now, affirmative consent, clear communication of boundaries, and the making of agreements has a critical role to play in keeping us safe, but it's somewhat overrated. 2 reasons. Firstly, if anything can dampen the flames of erotic fire, it's meticulous project planning of the anticipated sexual encounter. I mean, by the time it's all worked out, you're probably more wanting a cup of tea. Secondly, it's grossly inadequate to stand up to the task because it's based on some pretty flimsy assumptions. That we're fully transparent to ourselves, that we really know ourselves massively, that we're thinking consciously, that we're making rational decisions, and we're able to anticipate the likely outcome of what's agreed. Now, anybody in the throes of erotic passion isn't exactly thinking consciously or likely to make rational decisions. Frankly, that part of their brain is offline. Now, Affirmative consent offers protection, but it's a crude instrument and it's only a starting point. So take the example of two people on a Tantra workshop. They agree in the content of a structure, and the task is to give and receive touch, exploring different types of touch and tracking the sensations in the body. And as they talk about it, the receiver gets anxious. She's on a Tantra workshop, she's paid good money for some mind-blowing erotic experiences, and she'll be damned if she's going to pass up this opportunity. But she feels no connection to the person sat opposite her. So what she does, she decides to leave on her underwear, and she places any genital touch off limits. It's not quite what she'd hoped for, but she doesn't know how else to keep herself safe. And the giver respects this clearly communicated boundary, and they go on to have a perfectly pleasant experience. But it's hardly mind-blowing. And though she may learn something about herself in terms of the different types of touch she enjoys, it's unlikely to touch her at her core. And those are moments of real transformation, and it's what I believe we seek when we play with fire. So affirmative consent neither fully protects us, nor does it allow for this transformation. For that, we need limit consent. Now, limit consent takes us very close to the line, into courting danger. But it enables us to experience states of overwhelm, of surrender, where we become unstuck so that we can open ourselves up to new ways of thinking and of being. And that's transformative. Now, overwhelm is certainly a dysregulated state. That's why it's risky. There's an essence of it being almost unbearable, being too much, suffering pleasure. But it's not trauma. That said, it may tip over into trauma if it's not well held. In overwhelm, we don't submit, we surrender. And to surrender, we need to trust. We need to feel safety in our bodies, be connected to our partner, so we know they're attuned to us and can hold us. That's why we need affirmative consent at the beginning, because we don't know that. Such a deep level of trust takes time and repetition to establish. And one of the research participants spoke of a desire to surrender, but of never having found anybody she can surrender to. How will they know, she questioned. How will they know? And this question of how will they know followed me around. I kept wondering what she meant by it. And eventually I made my own sense of it. Our desire to know ourselves derives from experiencing ourselves as separate from the other. This other being the unknown parts of ourselves, or as the world as we perceive it as external to us. Us separate from the universe, separate from the oneness that we perceive to be outside of ourselves. So when we're driven by a desire to reconnect, it's that desire to feel whole. And when we surrender, we don't surrender to another, we surrender to this great unknown. And so to do that, we need to know that our partner can hold us. That through being so well attuned, they can journey with us to these very edges, sensing just how far we can go. Sensing when our yes means no. Sensing when our no means yes. And that can't be scripted. It can't even be described. We're in the realms of the enigmatic here. And yet I hope, that we all have a sense of what it's like to go there, even if sometimes those moments are rare and fleeting. And that, folks, is Tantra.